Ladies and gentlemen and variations thereof, welcome to the Selectives Lorecast, a casual Elder Scrolls podcast. My name is Rotten Deadite, and with me today are...
I am James, also known as Aramithius.
And I am Felix, also known as Banuhana Masaishi.
And today we are talking about Sermon 20 in the 36 Lessons of Vivec, which is the first sermon that Vivec, of Vivec's campaign against her own children, not including the hundreds of her own kids that she already murdered.
Yeah.
Details. Semantics.
And the one that Z killed because it was in her own self or some such.
Yes, exactly. And this is now, these are the kids with names, so they're the ones who count. And this is also after Vivec has dealt with the idea of, in Sermon 18, of her own destiny, and Sermon 19 with the building of the provisional house, and which is the sort of home base intelligence from whence Vivec shall strike out against her children, and fitting that this house exists in the state of Chim, since that is how Vivec is detecting the existence of these children who have run off.
Yep.
I've got indigestion. So the first monster was actually... Wait a minute, hold on. Did I miss anything in this synopsis?
Okay. I don't know. I want to run a theory past you, and I'm not sure how actually accurate it is, because I can spot very little in apart from the Ruddy Man and the various theories that go along with that. But the number of the children that Z winds up killing is interesting to me.
Conspicuous, yes.
Because it's not because there are 9. The thing in question for me with this is that 9 is 16 minus 7. And so you're thinking the number of the Daedric princes minus the 3 good Daedra minus the 4 House of Troubles. So is this... I've been trying to match the monsters that Vivec kills to the Daedric princes that aren't part of the Chimer Dunmer pantheon for a long while, but I'm not... everything I found is a little bit too tenuous for them to map easily on. I'm just not sure whether that's a link to be made or not.
Yeah, that's because Kirkbride's kind of confirmed that the children are supposed to represent the parts of Vivec that need to be destroyed so that Vivec can reach a state of divinity. And he listed them off in a forum post at one point, and they were things like the thing you ate last night, or the car you used to own, or so on. It seemed like a very arbitrary list. And I think that either it was a list of things that Kirkbride came up with while he was writing this, or it was a list of things that he, like, where he was kind of largely improvising the children, and then he went back and kind of made up in... like in post, kind of invented what they represented.
Yeah, post hoc rationalizations, yeah.
Yeah, or these are just the things that really mattered to him at the time. And so it's another element of, Kirkbride's sort of personal life being integrated into his art, which is, frequently done, so it's just fine.
It's the way art works.
Yeah. So, Vivec, so we start off here with the first monster was actually 2, having been born twice like his mother, father, Vivec. Now, all right.
Yep.
I've been thinking about this for a while. I think this has something to do with Moon Axel, the child, having a dual nature, which I think is actually mentioned later, specifically later on, having a dual nature. It's also somewhat it's also possible that you could say that Vivec was born twice because she was born from both her parents. So Amalexia birthed him and Sothasil birthed him. But I'm not entirely 100% sold on that. I mentioned it in the New Whirling School, but it's a theory I think somebody threw at me, and I was like, that's better than what I got. So I put that in there.
I would go with the whole, I must have been born before angle that
be.
Z says while Z is still an egg.
Well, I think that's a reference to reincarnation. Had their histories maybe those born twice had their histories rewritten by Vivec. That's cool.
Yes.
I like that, Felix. But then we'd kind of have to pitch who is Moon Axel before the 36 lessons. And that's a little tough to handle because of what Moon Axel represents, which is
Well, can we not infer that Moon Axel was one of the children to escape the pomegranate banquet? Because it says in this sermon, in Sermon 20, that Moon Axel was one of the 8 to escape Muatra.
Yeah. Oh, you're thinking that has something to do with, like, Moon Axel's then been... But see, I tend to think, like, the pomegranate banquet was part of the rewriting. So...
If the pomegranate banquet is when Vivec attained Chim, then absolutely it could be.
So anyway, he was not the mightiest of the 8 to escape Muatra, but his actions were the most worrisome. That's something to consider. We'll get back to that in a minute. He was known as Moon Axel, and he harvested the leftover foibles of nature. So...
oh no, my foibles.
Okay, my foibles. Look at these foibles. So, when I was writing this sermon, I had a lot of help from, I think it was on IRC at the time, and a lot of people were sort of speculating about, we had a big conversation about what Moon Axel's name might represent. And a lot of people, a lot of conversation revolved around the lunar lattice. I've not been able to find a connection outside of just the name Lunar Lattice and Moon Axel. I've not been able to find any connections other than that. And I would think that Moon Axel's nature would in some way refer to the Lunar Lattice.
This is why we need Moon Sugar Leader for stuff like this.
Yes.
But I think he was actually in the conversation.
Okay.
And so I don't well, we'll get onto Moon Axel's nature, and maybe then it'll be a little bit clearer about what I mean.
But the idea of connecting with Khajiit is an interesting one. Because if it's made up of the leftover foibles of nature, my first thought was that it was something like, well, the Khajiit were only given their final form sometime after everything else is settled. So they are the children. And the two things that they became later are kind of the leftovers. And you also, but I'm not sure quite where to connect that up with anything else a bit more meaningful, really.
Well, if he harvests the leftover foibles of nature, which is to say the flaws of, let's say, do we think nature or reality, or... as in nature, as in like the flora and fauna of Tamriel? Or...
Yeah, I was going with a kind of a mixture of the two, but
yeah, because it's his dual nature, so why not both? ¿Por qué no las dos?
Well, this he did twice, as was said, and the second harvest always brought ruin or unwritten law. So,
blast. There was a. I can't remember quite the details of this, but a Reddit post that speculated that Lig was the moons was looking into the nature of looking into Mehrunes Dagon and made a point about his name that it was. I will try and look it up, but it's Dagon the Moon Plunderer was what they kind of arrived at. And I can't remember what else.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah, it was really well argued, but it was not something that's kind of the common accepted knowledge at all. So I will bear that in mind. Bear that in mind, and I will come back to you on it once I've actually found it.
Okay.
And so
we'll
but
loop back
this
around.
could be connected to Mehrunes. Aha, here we are. Dagon created the Dagon created the moons, or if you're looking for Lig, look up is the name of the post. I will drop it in Twitch for those of you. Where are we? And right at the bottom is the thing that I'm asking about. Or should was. Hang on. I just came across a fascinating bit of lore from Battlespire. Dagon fashions a weapon, quote, from his own essence and calls it, quote, the battle sword of the Moon Reaver. Reeve is an English variant of reeve, spelt differently, which means to raid or plunder. So Dagon's created a weapon called the battle sword of the Moon Reaver. Dagon the Moon Plunderer. If moon plundering is part of Dagon's essence potentially, so I don't know whether that connects here or not, but it feels the most appropriate if it connects to anywhere.
Yeah, especially considering Battlespire is basically a space station. So
yeah.
Don't forget to play bingo, folks.
Yes, that is a very good point. Do play bingo. I will bring
this is a very interesting post 4 years ago. I am disappointed that I did not read this. I'm going to look into this.
Very, very good.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Oh, so does Moon here then not refer to Master and Secunda? I think Lotorio it does refer to both simultaneously. And but
that might be why the dual nature
could be. But one of the other things that we knocked around was the idea that Moon Axel was referring to a moon shape, so one assumes the crescent, and then an axle from it. And so we were trying to figure out if there was a shape or like, you know, that involved like a crescent with a rod that would have, or perhaps a crescent shape that was an axle. And I don't think we came up with anything good. Because we were trying to figure out, like, does Moon refer to Master or Secunda or both? And we didn't have any luck.
Or the third moon.
Oh god! Well, or the invisible one.
Yeah, which I'm not sure actually existed yet in any sort of conception.
And to make matters worse, the main is sometimes described as being a moon himself because he travels up into the stars and floats around in his big fur ball. So and once again we're back to the Khajiit.
Yeah. Well, that always happens with the moons. But unless the way and looking at the axle is the thing upon which the moons turn.
Oh, Jesus. Okay.
There we are. Felix has brought in a definition. So a rod or shafts that connect a pair of wheels to propel them and retain the position of the wheels to one another. So
the connecting line between Master and Secunda.
Yeah.
You ever get the feeling that you're right on the edge of having a really great thought, but it's just not. It's just not happening yet.
Let's keep going. We can see where this goes.
So his aspect was faceted like a polyhedron. So what we're actually going to deal with a lot in this sermon is the nature of perfection and simplicity, and the simplicity of perfection, and attempts to reach that perfection. I don't remember where I get into that. It's somewhere in here. So I'm just going to keep going because I know I mentioned it in this sermon somewhere.
Yeah. Is it something, if we're thinking about that, I just want to kind of raise for future reference the idea of the Chancellor of Exactitude, the whole thing of certitude being the tool of puzzle box logicians and so on.
Girls of White Glamour. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, the Girls of White Glamour is a little less relevant, but the idea of everything being precise and certain and so on, relating to geometry.
Right.
And in potentially also astronomy, because the idea of the movement of the celestial bodies is something that is predictable, at least in this world. I don't know whether they've ever been conceptualized as being entirely not predictable in Tamriel. I mean, apart from the serpent, but So
True.
you've got those sorts of links.
So no perils are mentioned in the finding of Moon Axel, but it was known that he was immune to spears. By the way, I do spend a lot of time talking about the ego-self axis at this point. And that was a suggestion for his name. And you can mark off Carl Jung if you've got that on your bingo card. And I think that was the facet is the important word here. He looks differently from different angles. Maybe, but I think I have an explanation for that in a little bit. But we'll get to it.
Have an explanation, but yeah.
Right. I also mentioned that Satha Sil discusses the Adric imperfections a bit in Elder Scrolls Online and describes them as thrones. The seats of symbols and their kingdoms are context. So perhaps Moon Axel was a throne seeker trying to define his kingdom by picking up the scraps, like in other words, the maybes that were not yet claimed by other kings.
The leftover foibles.
The leftover foibles, exactly.
And it's also actually something that's quite dangerous and so on. Sorry, I've just realized what harvesting the leftover foibles of nature might mean. Because if we consider that the earth bones and the Almafe are the laws of nature, he's essentially hoovering up other gods in some way, shape, or form. So Moon Axel is doing something. I don't know whether we can equate it to soul stacking and combining and the sixth path later on. Is it that
possibly
we see in Sermon 35 or 36, whichever one it is?
Well, apparently I decided to explain what I was talking about with the geometry thing right here. So I thought for a little while there that his face was faceted like a polyhedron might have been sort of like a fourth wall jab at low polygon assets.
There's a joke to be made there for sure.
Yeah. But it kind of got me off on a thing where I was talking about I was briefly messing around with Plato's theory of forms, where I was talking about how the closer something gets to its original form, the closer to perfect it can be considered. The closer it gets to its universal form. But then I suggested the idea of thinking about this in terms of geometry, where this will come into play later when we talk about being immune to spears. The idea of a true circle is a continuous curve which has no facets and no points, right? Or rather, you could say that has one point, and that point exists entirely around its circumference. And in order to reproduce a circle without using a curve, without using that particular form of geometry, in other words, to create an actual circle in, say, a game engine, game engines are optimized to draw triangles, in other words, straight lines. So the more accurate the circle becomes, in other words, the closer to perfection it becomes, the more polygons are required to create that circle. But you'll never, no matter how many polygons you add, you'll never have an actual circle. You'll just have a very, very complicated object, but never a perfect circle. So the circle contains no straight lines. And even if you were provided with a million polygons, you would never be able to perfectly replicate a circle.
But that's just a fractal issue, basically, isn't it?
Well, it's a limitation of the engine, but I'm trying to suggest that this is a school of thought here.
Yeah.
So one of the ways that the relationship between the divine and mortality is represented is sometimes with a circle and a line. Okay.
Yeah.
The idea that so what's keeping the important point of Moon Axel here, which is a again, if we're thinking Moon Axel is just a line between two circles, it's that Moon Axel is attempting to become perfect or a god, but it can never become perfect, and it can instead all it can do is harvest the flaws. It can only become a bigger collection of flaws, or in other words, it can only become a bigger collection of lines, of points and lines.
It's also a critique of the tribunal. Sorry, a penny has just dropped. The idea that an axle is a roller shaft that connects a pair of wheels to propel them and retains the position of the wheels to one another is the key thing of my thought here, to use Felix's definition.
A little bit like what Vivec does for Sothicil and Amalexia.
Yeah, and I was also thinking of between mortality and divinity quite apart, as more broadly, the idea of Moon Axle as as if we're again using it as thinking of the monsters as aspects of Vivec. This is the difference between mortality and divinity that he is fighting here.
Yeah. And so this is why Moon Axle is immune to spears. Instead, Vivec has to use the sword not held against him. The sword not held... Again, remember that it's possible that during editing, the 36 lessons may have moved around a little bit in order. This was suggested by, I think, Kirkbride as being the Treasurewood sword. But Vivec does not get the Treasurewood sword until Sermon 22.
That's why he's not holding it at the moment.
But Vivec is depicted as wielding the sword not held in her sword meeting with Cyrus the Restless.
Oh, okay.
It's a sword that just sort of hovers and is not actually physically held by Vivec.
That's because the tongue belonged to Mephala, but that's another conversation.
Okay. And yeah, so that's the idea. So the one of the explanations I have in the New Whirling School is that it's called the sword not held because he doesn't have it yet. But another take is that the sword is akin to intellect. In other words, a sharpened edge to bring against the complexity and break it down into examinable pieces. So it's
By the way, sorry, can I just get a little little jab in here about that?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yes.
Like a little jab the point. Sorry, it's me making a pun, but
yes,
it's also something that I touch on in my Redguard Coda story, where there's a throwaway line of like the subheader for a chapter which says the sharper the mind, the sharper the blade, and how it relates to the Ansei and their swords and how effective or not effective they may or may not have been, which is also related to like godhood and searching for divinity and stuff like that. So just letting people know this is a thread that can be pulled in many different directions with different cultures.
Yeah.
And also with Redguards, you're going to understand part of why I made that reference in the next paragraph of this sermon, I think, when he describes the sword.
Before he took issue with the monster, the warrior poet asks, "How came you to be immune to spears?" To which Moon Axle replied, "Mine is a dual nature and protean. I am in fact made of many straight lines." Remember what I was talking about with the...
Yep.
Though none last too long, in this way I have learned to ignore all true segments. So because Moon Axle is made of lines, it cannot be injured by lines. So luckily the sword not held was curved, and therefore could cut into Moon Axle.
Hey!
There we go. He's got
swords,
curved
baby.
swords. Yeah. Exactly. Curved swords. It's true. Yeah.
And y'all thought Skyrim was so original for that. Get the fuck out of here.
Oh, Kitty Cat.
Yes.
How old is she?
She is...
That cat is drooling on you.
Yes. She's happy.
Pretty kitty.
Yeah. She's about 12, 13 now.
13 years old. Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
Look at that drool. Good Lord.
Part of that is because she doesn't
She's
have
just
many
dribbling
teeth
on him.
Aww.
Oh,
Poor
happy.
toothless kitty.
Oh, she has no teeth. Oh, okay. That's it then. Yeah. No teeths.
But,
So
She's a real cutie, though.
Let's see. In fact, made of many straight lines. Okay, so in case you missed the Jung reference, here we got some more again.
Hey.
When the ego is confronted directly, there tends to be a reaction from the ego as it tries to reassert itself. Part of the mystic ambition to rid oneself of ego involves subduing these assertions of the reality, of the identity. The many statements of I am, I want, I don't want, I fear, etc. since they are thought to be illusory and serving only to keep one from the goal of true self or unity. Crowley's poem Dust Devils describes whirling torrents composed of eyes in the abyss, representing that such assertions are needed to be overcome to achieve ego death. Carl Jung also dealt with this kind of composition of the ego only for him, and later for Joseph Campbell. Its death wasn't necessary on the path towards personal fulfillment and potential, but yet did warn against being ruled by ego's dictatorship. The ego wants explanation always in order to assert its existence. Try to live without the ego. Whatever must come to you will come. Don't allow yourself to be led astray by the ravings of the animus. He will try every stunt to get you out of the realization of stillness, which is truly the self. So Joseph Campbell talked about the ego as a dragon. What I want, what I believe, what I can do, what I think I love, and all of that. What I regard as the aim of my life, and so forth. It might be too small. It might be what pins you down. And if it's simply that of doing what the environment tells you to do, then it is certainly holding you down. And so the environment is your dragon as it reflects within yourself. Which I'm sure Jung would have really appreciated. Yeah, it's very hard to get rid of the I in Western thought. Just sort of the concept of consciousness in general is hard for Westerners to separate from the idea of themselves.
Is that actually something that has an impact on how Vivec is considering consciousness and divinity because of the only true name of God, I?
Mm-hmm.
So there is part of me that thinks about, is all this stuff about ego death and so on actually that relevant almost? Because Chim is essentially encouraging you to go towards both.
Sort of, this is kind of where the difference between Chim and enlightenment and gnosis start showing their colors. Enlightenment in the Buddhist sense involves the understanding that it's not just that the world is illusory, it's that you are as well, and that none of these things exist, and that your consciousness is also an illusion, and is not real in any respect. Whereas Gnosis kind of takes the approach of like, it's not real because you're part of a being, a great being, and it's God existing. What you are is God experiencing itself. Whereas Buddhism kind of suggests that that's not the case either. It's that nothing is real, and that there's not even like a God necessarily, or a universal consciousness of any kind. It's even more
Don't
abstract.
tell all the gods of Buddhism that. Oh no.
Well, they have that, but I mean, even those gods are in fact, just the nature of the illusion is kind of the thinking.
They're testing you.
Yes.
I think it is also worth pointing
metaphors
out,
or whatever. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it is also worth pointing out and mentioning that this is something that we had touched on a little bit in several previous sermon episodes. I can't remember if it was like the last two, but between you, me, and Andrew, we talked a bit about Hinduism and like dharmic religions and how they view in general, and with their differences with viewing enlightenment and divinity and the cycle of suffering and existence, and if it's real or not. We have touched on this before, so all the more reason that people should watch the other episodes. But to your point about the West and kind of struggling with that was something that, again, I know we talked on possibly even in the last episode about how it's a big difference between Hinduism and Buddhism is what constitutes divinity in the realization of you are part of a greater being, and so you have to return to that kind of oneness with the greater being or spiritual energy that is the universe, versus coming to the realization that it isn't, and it's just energy. Like there's kind of like a weird, it kind of grays the lines between them a bit, but I remember we definitely talked about that at some point fairly recently.
Yeah, in previous episodes, hopefully there's some additional information for people there.
Go watch the other episodes, folks.
Yeah, basically.
And And before the sun was up, he
What?
had
Sorry,
he was.
hang on. Hang on. I'm lost as to where we are for starters.
Luckily, the
But
sword not held was curved and therefore could cut into Moon Axel.
Okay. The idea of being a dual nature and protean, I'm kind of curious that he's therefore immune to spears as opposed to swords, because spears, I would think that if he was in dual nature, then it would be immune to cleaving because they're already cleaved in two. But spears are not a cleaving weapon; they pierce. They do a different thing to the thing that they're hitting. So I'm just wondering if there's either a contradiction there or something that is different.
Possibly. Well,
how it's done.
I would suggest that even piercing would be something that Moon Axel would be resistant to.
So okay, there's a couple things here actually. I haven't really gone on a bit of a rant in a while. And it's all kind of disjointed, but sorry. So protean means like having a tendency to change in nature. And there's also an ancient Greek god known as Proteus. He was subservient to Poseidon, but was also in many cases described as being much ancient and more kind of unknowable than Poseidon. And that's where we get the term the old man of the sea, is this Proteus god. He's apparently the prophetic old man of the sea and shepherd of the sea's flocks, usually referred to as seals. And so when something is constantly changing in its nature, so he was also seen as like a shapeshifter, so he could appear as kind of monstrous or like an old man or like a creature, you know, one of those classical shapeshifting, but not necessarily a trickster deity, but there are elements of that based on like what little I was able to gather about Proteus. And the only reason I know a little bit about Proteus is because I only recently watched The Lighthouse for the first time, and I was like, the hell is this? And so, oh, well, it's about like protean stuff, and Proteus, because like you see one of the depictions in the film is kind of like that. And I was like, huh, okay, well, this is neat, and I'm sure it will never be useful at any other point in my life. And here we are.
It's about why you shouldn't go whacking off in the shed.
Yeah.
That's what that movie's about. Don't be whacking off in the shed.
That movie is just, oh God. But,
so good. It's a good movie.
No, but again, the ability to be able to change frequently or easily is, you know, I want people to try and think of that. And then at some point, and I forget, doesn't Vivec somehow refer to Mawatra as like truth manifest, or like an assemblage of truth or something like that? I think there was like something about Mawatra and truth that was said at some point somewhere. And so when you have something that can change its nature, it's like, you know, here's the truth. And it's like, well, I don't know about that, because you can change it, right?
It's a great move. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Jay and Silent Bob taught me well. But that I think is something that should also, even though it's kind of maybe a throwaway line there in the sermon, it's something that people should keep in mind about what it actually means to be protean and where that comes from Greek mythology, which is, of course, generally speaking, the basis of the vast majority of Western philosophy. So
is there something to be mined out of that by the fact that that Proteus was a god of the sea, and we definitely have the line of moving water resembles truth by its trembling.
Nah, yeah.
But it's different because as every single instance of truth in the sermons is always equated with violence. You have things like destroyed in the manner of truth by a great hammering, and stuff like that. Truth always implies violence, and by its trembling is the threat of violence. That's one of the run-throughs for every single appearance of the word truth, and I know this for a fact. I've searched for it. So
I'm not challenging that at all.
It's just a really interesting notion because truth in that sense is not protean. It's kind of truth is my husband instructed to smash, and it's blunt, it's violent, it's something that is really, really simple and not desirable. The idea of you must be a letter written in uncertainty as something as kind of the desirable state, also sort of hints at the idea of protean qualities being the more desirable thing, not more desirable thing than truth in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I don't know quite where I was going with that.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I said words and there was ranting.
It does seem like
that's
there's
most of this podcast.
It does seem like there's something that we're missing that's fundamental here, because it feels like we're looking at contradictory concepts that are like in one chapter are good and then in another chapter they're bad. And I think what's happening here is that we just don't have a good grip of, like, we're not seeing exactly what it is that's being said here, which is pretty much my whole life with these things.
Yeah, like I was about to say, like, if you're not feeling that way about the 36 lessons, something's wrong.
Yeah. So Vivec did not slay him outright, for to do so would be to keep the foibles of nature within him and not back where they belonged. So that this is related to why Vivec doesn't kill her children exactly, but rather absorbs them. This is the nature of milk taker, is that we are absorbing the nature of these children we're taking the nature of these children instead of destroying them or killing them, I suppose. Soon Vivec had traced geography right again, and Moon Axel was ready to be slain. I'm still not sure what that means.
It's talking. I want to say it's something about the way that you find your way back to places, which kind of implies that Moon Axel and relying on the Axel part is kind of the way that you orient yourself. Again, kind of perhaps just because I said it earlier, so I'm going to say it again, is that map between humanity and or mortality and divinity. Possibly. I don't know. Yeah.
Well,
it feels like it possibly relates to that. Go for it, Felix.
I have another kind of just like silly thing based on part of what Chris said earlier about his shape was polygonal, or sorry, it was a polyhedron. So like, yeah, low polygon texture count, etc. And so the idea of making the geography right again is, oh, hey, wait a second, this asset is out of place, and that's technically a foible of nature. Hey, wait a second, why is this tree in the Ascadian Isles hovering and isn't actually connected to the ground? That's kind of neat and interesting. Oh, whoops, sorry, that's definitely a mistake. So there's that element to it. You could also see it to kind of try and take it a little more seriously, which I know very rare for me. You could look at the making the geography right again in terms of the plan for Mundus as Magnus intended. So it's like things are supposed to be here and work this way, but then that weird little moon asshole went and ruined it, and that's why I left. So that could be another way of looking at making the geography right. So putting things back into their right place in accordance with the grand design of the bones of Mundus and Adra, and like all that lovely Adric stuff that came before the what's it called? I want to say Trial of Lorcan, but I don't think that's
Convention.
That's the case. The what?
Stuff that came before Convention?
Yeah. So yeah, I think that like that's where you could also infer an actual in-universe reality and not just make a silly video game assets joke. That's where I could sort of trace that to.
Or do both.
Yeah, why not both?
Why not
¿Por qué no las dos?
So let's see. So how does Vivec actually kill Moon Axel? Vivec rose up into his giant form to be terrible to look upon. He reached into the west and pulled out a canyon, holding it like a horn. He reached east and ate a handful of Nyx hounds. Blowing their spirits through the canyon made a terrible wail, not unlike an unsolved woman. He said, "Let this overtake you," and Moon Axel was overtaken by the curvature of stolen souls. They wrapped about the monster like resin until finally he could not move, nor could his dual nature. So surrounding things with resin is going to come into play in a later sermon. Watch out for that.
Is this in any way related to Draco Chrysalis by any chance?
I'm still not sure what that word means, and I've seen a lot of people speculate about it, and I don't know.
Maybe, but it certainly comes in. Is it the sages of the numbered rooms, or am I misremembering?
Yes, it's the captured sage, Sermon 28, I think.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Whereas a sage is wrapped in resin.
Yes.
But so Vivec said, "Now you are solved," and pierced his child with Muatra.
I do want to kind of go a bit more into that, because is what's happening here kind of driving the child further towards enlightenment, whatever that means, or towards amaranth, maybe, which is a very weird way to kill a thing. So, what Vivec is doing to her children, not killing them, but just solving them in some way, like an equation almost.
Because the issue here, the Vivec's children are the flaws of her nature.
Yes.
And so this is what's happening here is Vivec is reabsorbing them after processing them. It's who here goes to a therapist? So it's the idea is that what you're doing is you're taking out trauma or negative experiences or negative emotions, and you're examining them in the light of of consciousness, and deconstructing them and finding their origins and learning how they work and what their signs are, and etc. And then instead of disposing of them, you then effectively have polished them into a jewel, and you bring them back into yourself. And this is something that in some ways literally happens with some forms of therapy. I'm thinking ego state therapy, where you are bringing dark parts of your mind into the light and confronting it in as constructive a manner as possible. It's not supposed to be a violent confrontation. It's supposed to be you're effectively learning to love yourself. This is related to Jung's shadow work. And
really busting out the Jung today, aren't we?
We are.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean,
I also wonder, are all of the monsters slain with Muatra, or are they killed with other things? Oh, sorry, the sword not held is in this one, because that idea, that interpretation of how you deal with therapy and so on is an interesting one. It just occurs to me that it relates to Muatra's anagram potentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, very much. And so that is effectively what we're doing here, is that Moon Axel was not able to be reprocessed without first being, brought out and held down and examined and tamed before it can then be reabsorbed with Milk Taker. And so now you are solved, as in the noise that is made is of an unsolved woman, and then the insertion of Muatra solves the unsolved equation.
It's all dicks,
It's
baby.
it's all about the penis. And
by the way, for those who are listening or watching and aren't aware, to save them some searching and trying to figure it out, the anagram of Muatra is trauma.
Yeah.
Yes.
The anagram of Muatra is trauma.
James is having thoughts.
No, I'm having anger. Is what I'm having.
I'm not having thoughts. I'm having rage.
Yes, I'm having rage because it's not it's not as blatant as the end of the trial of Vivec, but it's a similar kind of solution. It's the kind of
Vivec did the same to the Nord invaders, so
Yeah.
This is just a pattern for Vivec.
I
really.
it just annoys me that this is that the solution for the unsolved woman is a penis.
Yes.
Apparently.
Yep.
No.
Yeah.
No.
That
It's
is
like
not
how
the
to
way it
tell when
works.
someone was written by a man, baby.
Basically.
But yeah. Although again, I kind of want to stress to people that there is again in Hinduism, there's a common sort of dual spiritual representation of Shiva and his wife Parvati, which is
Pavarti or
basically just.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chris.
I think was I pronouncing that wrong? I thought it was Pavarti, or is it Parvati?
I think it's
Man.
Parvati.
Okay, yeah, you're okay.
Yeah. I think again,
Parvati,
don't quote me. I'm very much an outsider to Hinduism in India and all this good stuff. Everything I learned is just kind of like secondhand. But
Parvati. Okay, great.
the main thing is that a very common representation of Shiva is, I think it's called the linga or the lingam, and it's a smooth round with like a rounded top, and it's got, you know, some markings, and you're pouring water or milk over it as offerings, and it's very much meant to represent a penis. And when it's shown together with the one that represents Parvati, it kind of looks like a penis and a vagina.
Yeah, in a bowl,
one,
sort of.
Because because it's meant to represent both masculine and feminine energies. Because again, Hinduism is big on technically everything is just a form of energy, or like it comes from an energetic place. And so that is like, oh yes, and by merging, that's the true sum totality, and this is supposed to help you figure things out a bit more and see things in a broader scope. So that's the thing you will see. In fact, if you've ever been to India, you might have just accidentally seen some shrines while you were driving around Delhi or in Agra, and you were like, oh, a shrine, neat, I don't know what it represents. It's like, well, it represents the two chief cosmic deities and sexual intercourse. So there you go, folks. It's all dicks, and it's dicks all the way down.
So dicks all the way down, yeah.
Sorry to say.
So
which is a very human thing, right? Because it's like we're always reflecting in many ways about our own selves, right? Like we see this especially with Greek and Roman gods, where they feel very human because they have all these huge flaws, and we try and see the best in the
people.
heroes who take them down. You know, we want to believe in the goodness of God, and then like the badness of like another force that's acting on it. Like there's all these different religions, you know, even cults. It's a reflection of humanity and the human condition, which means unfortunately a lot of the times you're gonna get some weird sex stuff, and that's just kind of how it is.
Yep.
There's some interesting names trying to relate the stuff in Hinduism to chat. I don't know whether that's anything.
Okay, Parvati Ardhanarishvara.
The name of the Shiva Parvati fusion deity.
Yes, this whole thing. Yeah. Okay.
The fusion deity.
All right.
Help me, James.
Which
you've seen
fusion?
Dragon Ball, right?
No.
Okay. Yeah, all right.
Okay.
No.
So
anyway, Felix sounds like he's going to Felix. So
yeah.
James
so it's okay. Ardhanarishvara is the Lord whose half is a woman. It's generally meant to be like half Shiva, half Parvati, or his consort Shakti. So yeah, I'm not too familiar with it, but it is seen as like a thing that you can have. There are representations going back to like the Kushan period, and I think the core, crucially, also is that the weapon is a sword. Let me check this real quick.
Mm-hmm.
The Trishula is... Oh, wait, no. Sorry, it's the trident. My bad, which is often associated with Shiva. So, my bad. No, it's not a sword. It's another fucking staff, though. But yeah, okay. It's a trident, a divine symbol commonly used, one of the principal symbols in Hinduism. That is technically false. It's predominantly associated with Shiva, but Shiva being the chief of the Hindu pantheon, unless you follow Vaishnavism, where you view Vishnu as the chief of the pantheon. It's a whole thing. But yeah, I don't know much about it. I just know that it is a thing that has been depicted before, and I think part of its representation is again about, you know, the fusion of male and or masculine and feminine energies, thus representing power and oneness. Let me just see here. It's just some stuff about old cults. You can still find shrines all over India and Southeast Asia. It'd be way too much for me to even like piece together from like everything, because again, I don't know too much about it, but like I do, it is familiar in that I've seen and heard about the union before, and some of the depictions are great, where it literally shows like either two-headed or like half, like literally split down the middle, half man, half woman. So it's like half a sari and half a loincloth made of tiger skin. It's actually really cool. Yeah, but I don't know too much about it. Just that it is a thing that definitely exists.
Well, so we're picking up after the shattering of Moon Axel. The lines of Moon Axel were collected by Valathi philosophers and taken into caves. There, and for a year, Vivec taught the philosophers how to turn the lines of his sun into the spokes of mystery wheels. This was the birth of the first Whirling school.
Hey!
Before, there had only been the surface thought of fire. So, these are...
Also,
this is a system, by the way, I should mention, that Vivec learned in a previous chapter. The idea of building a wheel out of spokes. So.
Right. Although, should we evaluate a little bit the line about reaching to the west and grabbed a canyon, and reaching to the east and like consumed Nick sounds? Is there something to piece from that, with like west being the past, east being new dawn of possibility?
I don't think that was a thing when this was written.
Currency, like, is there something to be wrought from this or no?
I worked on it for a while, and I was not able to get anything that I liked.
There is something about Vivec and Nick's hounds. I can't recall whether Vivec is supposed to have created them or...
No, the Nyx hounds were originally supposed to be trans-dimensional beasts that, like Tyndalos hounds from the Hounds of Tyndalos by H.P. Lovecraft, which were supposed to attack you if you... which were attacking Ashlander wise women while they performed a ritual. I don't remember what the ritual was, and while they were performing a ritual, holes from Oblivion would show up, and Nyx hounds would come out through the holes and attack you, and you had to defend the wise women. So that was originally going to be the idea behind Nyx hounds, was that they were actually a Daedroth, and then they basically ran out of budget for monsters to put around Morrowind, and so they rewrote the lore and stuck them in as regular critters. They were originally, I don't think I think they still do, but they were supposed to walk in straight lines, like back and forth, like that.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think they still kind of do that in Morrowind, but but that was like the way you were supposed to see them from a distance, was walking in these straight, like that, very quickly, before they eventually saw you, and they would just turn and let's see. So the mystery wheels, of course, are more of these sort of conceptual wheels, like Vivec attained the form of in a previous chapter. The Whirling schools are a reference to Sufi turning. I don't know that for sure, but I'm
Whirling dervishes.
Sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure, guys.
Which are actually fascinating.
Yeah. And it is a very, very interesting practice. It's there's not a lot of English translated text out there to read about Sufi, but try and find what you can, because you will get lost in a hurry. It is, and I mean that in a good way. I mean, your whole day will disappear. It's fucking fascinating.
You know what? I'm gonna go find one of my favorite Sufi videos. Actually, I'll post it in the chat.
Oh, is this the one that Michael's been saying for? We imagine that the Murakati are like this.
Oh, yeah.
No, that was me who suggested that.
Oh, was that? Sorry.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, the dance that the Maracati Selectives did was a Sufi twirling
Sufi
dance.
dance.
Yeah.
Well, so not quite like that.
Not quite.
Let me find it. We'll show it. You can see it. Yeah.
Mhm.
Give me a minute.
So before there had only been the surface thought of fire. So this triggered something in me when I read that.
Okay.
It is certainly possible for the regular inhabitant of Mundus to understand and even believe in the concept of Chim in the dream state universe, but another thing entirely for a person to completely comprehend with their mind, body, and soul the same concepts. To paraphrase a section from Zen Merging of East and West by Roshi P. Kapleur, reading about he said enlightenment, but I replaced it with Chim. Reading about Chim is like reading about nutrition when you're hungry. Only when you taste, chew, and swallow the food will you feel satisfied. And even then, the food you have eaten will not nourish you until digestion and assimilation has taken place. This is similar to Chim. Unless you have integrated into your daily life what you have perceived, your awakening is not working for you yet. It will not transform your life. And just as the final step in nutrition is elimination, so must one eventually rid oneself of the notion of I am enlightened. Only then can you walk freely between heaven and earth. Now suppose your foot itches. Does it feel better to scratch your bare foot or to scratch the itch through your shoe? Reading about Chim is like scratching an itch through your shoe. So, that elimination part of that is going to become important. In a later, when we murder another kid later on. And it's a very useful way to think about how people zero sum in the Elder Scrolls universe. It's a good way to think about why learning about Chim doesn't immediately make you delete yourself. There's a big difference between intellectually understanding Chim and understanding Chim through your soul itself. Seeing it as a wheel is seeing it as having logic to it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The surface thought of fire is what that means. It's just the idea or the intellectual conceptualization of fire. It's not the actual fire itself. And the fact that there's a lot of ways to parallel the idea of enlightenment and fire as well, and energy and ki and etc.
Particularly if you get into alchemy and stuff. That's always my thought.
Yeah.
Kind of,
Also, sorry, go.
It's just the idea of the new Whirling school. If we're talking the surface thought of fire as sort of the beginning point, and if we're going with Western alchemy, that it then goes into the secret fire, and that side of things. And so the spokes of mystery wheels are a refinement of that. That frankly, the kind of sticking the before there was only this is a really awkward way of thinking about it, because that's not the progression. We're going from fire to the spokes of mystery wheels. So it's the sense of fire as the active principle to something that is then a reflection of the world, is sort of as the second stage almost. So it's the idea of the Whirling school as a progression from one thing to another in some way. And quite what that means, I think we'll get to a little bit more in the sermon, but I'm not fully formed on my thoughts on that yet. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah,
that's fair.
Unfortunately, a lot of this sermon is kind of like barely touching incredibly complicated ideas.
Yeah, that's the problem with several of the sermons.
Yeah.
But also want to say thank you to James for posting the Sufi Zikr dance in chat for me, because only just now did I realize I'm not logged into Twitch. Whoopsie!
Hey, all right.
Yeah.
So
yeah, people can check that out.
So Vivec looked at his first willing students and observed, and here comes this motherfucker coming in with it. Here he comes with his bullshit again. Yeah.
What is that dance? Good Lord.
It's I'll find the meme somewhere. It's something my wife and I have been doing.
God, all right.
Here I come with my bullshit again. Alike the egg-layered universe is this morbid possession of three distant coverage, soul wrecked and alive, like my name is alive. In this cloister you have discovered one walking path, healed like a sword but more coarsened. So edged is it that it has to be whispered to keep the tongue from bleeding, where its signs evacuate their former meetings, like empires that tarry too long. Okay,
All
so
right,
let's
that's
start
a
at the
lot,
beginning.
but we got a
that's
mention of a walking
only one
way,
of three
so
paragraphs.
there we go.
So yeah,
Yep.
alike the egg-layered universe is this morbid possession of three distant coverage. So, it's egg-layered, the Arbus, in the respect that it is comprised of layers. If you want,
It's like an onion.
Aetherius or Oblivion, or it's layered as in like the layers of the Dreamers.
It's also, I would say that the idea of it as an egg versus an onion is that an egg has...
Or an ogre.
Yeah. Yeah, obligatory Shrek reference.
Never gonna pass that up. Never.
I don't think...
Never gonna pass that up.
I don't ever think that that Shrek will be on the bingo card.
Oh, I hope not.
Yeah.
That's too easy.
Yeah, it absolutely is too easy. But the idea of
Sure
an egg as a thing with layers is that it has potential. That you have things that eggs can become. So an egg-layered universe is a universe that can become something else, in my opinion.
And there was also the I think I mentioned the egg-layered universe in a previous sermon because there's a diagram I would have included by, I think, D of all people. If you want to talk about fucking...
She does diagrams very well.
Yeah, well, yeah, he's a talented guy. If you want to talk about alchemists again. And it was literally a diagram of reality as an egg. And the albumin was one thing, and then the yolk was another thing, and etc. Yeah, it was... I could go digging through my own website, but I'm not going to fucking bother.
Okay, all right. We're not worth it then.
Yeah, no, you guys aren't important enough. I'm looking through my hard drive instead of my website.
Okay.
It's in here somewhere.
A couple things to add though about like egg and everything. I think we also mentioned it earlier in the sermons, like when we were just getting started about Vivec being herself like in egg form and how that represents change and possibility. So it very much tracks in that regard. Also, fun little trivia anecdote: the national epic of Finland, the Kalevala, mentions that the universe came from an egg. So there you go, folks. It's in other cultures as well.
I can't find that image, so I'm scared that I didn't, in fact, put it on the commentaries, which is fucking tragic because it's great.
Gonna have to contact D again.
Oh, we have a bingo.
Hey, congratulations.
Yep.
You win an internet cookie. You win
Woohoo.
the
You win
Fork of
nothing.
Horripilation.
Eesh. No, it's Egg World diagram. Fucking.
Nope.
I hate everything. Anyway.
Anyway,
I'll dig it. I'll find it. I found it once.
Dig a hole,
Diggy hole.
hang on. Alike the egg universe is this morbid possession of three distant coverage. What is the three distant coverage? Because
I have thoughts, but they're not serious.
That's 3 points removed from a thing, as far as I'm concerned. But I'm perfectly happy to hear Felix's not serious thoughts, because they're probably more fun than mine.
So, like, my main view of like that line of three distant coverage. So you could interpret that a couple ways. One, in that it's meant to be somewhat literal, which I highly doubt. That it's literally three sort of layers of existence removed from the world that the monks that are closer to way might know or be familiar with. The other thing to talk about of three distant could be just the enantiomorph itself, because there are three and they're all kind of playing off each other, and it's a baseline of how the system works in this godforsaken universe that is the Elder Scrolls universe. So you could have that. And those were really just the two just like incredibly lazy ideas that I had with regards to that line. I'm more than happy to hear literally anything else.
I don't even fucking try on the New Whirling School to explain that, to explain the three distant coverage. I think, because the thing that bothers me about it is it's like like the egg layer universe is this morbid possession of three distant coverage. Like three distant doesn't. You mentioned three in the 36 lessons of Vivec. First thing you think of, Amsavi, but it's three distant, as in separated by three layers, perhaps. Like, are we talking
That's
about?
Why I suggested three layers removed from existence. So
yeah. So is it like Aetherius in the respect that Aetherius Oblivion Mundus? Like, I don't know.
Possibly, which you can then also link to things like yolk and egg white.
Okay,
and
sure, that makes sense.
Shell, maybe. I mean, if you want to.
I would love to hear opinions. From anybody and everybody about what the fuck that means. Distant in three space, like three-dimensional space, Felix in chat, or covering three distances. Yeah, you see what I mean? It's not. It's
It can go in so many different directions.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's tough for shitty reasons. It's tough because like there's not enough there, 3D. Yeah. Okay. So a symbol god without a context house is meaningless. A context without a symbol is sterile. Neither the god nor the house can exist separately, for they condition and change each other. So for every god or goddess, there is a house, and for every house, there is a god or goddess, though they may not be visible or apparent. So go ahead and guess who wrote that shit.
Knowing you, Crowley.
Bingo. Ding, ding, ding. Yes, you're correct.
That should be a bingo option. It's like Chris mentions Crowley.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Vivec's name is alive because it exists within its house and context, and is fertile due to being alive with meaning and a context, and of a context of herself. Right. Okay. So the name only has power if it is associated with something that can make it alive.
Yeah. Yeah, it only that's the same with all language though. Language only has meaning within its own socially determined context.
Because it's based on meat. The moment the meat dies, the meaning dies. Yep.
It's more that it's shared between different things. It's not anything to do with it being organic, but you cannot have a language that only one person understands. A language that is only known by one person
is just gobbledygook, then I guess, right? It's just noises.
Yes, but also, also if you are trying to make your own language and say only I will ever know this language, you have no real referent. I mean, this is partly a cribbing and a skewing of Wittgenstein's private language argument, but he was kind of using it to disprove the idea of body and soul duality, which is absolutely not what I'm doing with it right this second.
Wow, I'm completely lost.
Yeah, I'm not sure I totally understood it, even when I was being taught it. My essays on it got torn to shreds, so I probably do not know what I'm talking about here. But if you want to check that out, look up Ludwig Wittgenstein, private language argument. It's the basic idea of you want to describe a sensation through the use of a private language. You do that thing, and you only use it to refer to that yourself, within yourself. You have no real way of checking what that sensation was. Even your memory as a referent doesn't quite work. It never equates fully to the sensation.
By the
And
way, oh
yep.
no, sorry. I
And
thought you were done. My bad.
yeah, and so you have no way of assigning actual meaning to the thing, and so the language. So both the idea of if your mind or if your mind and body or soul and body are distinct, you should be able to have some distinct way of referring between the two, which doesn't actually exist. And also, if you are trying to produce meaning without referring to anything other than yourself, or without referring to something beyond yourself, it doesn't work, because you cannot be sure what if the thing you're referring to is actually as it was experienced before, because you have no way of checking beyond that. That's my understanding of it. It may be horribly flawed. If you want to find out more, please look it up. I am by no means an expert on that one.
Duly
Yeah, that
noted.
sounds like something you'd have to be an expert on, because it sounds complicated.
What? And the
Jesus.
sermons here aren't. Come on now.
Yeah, I know, right?
We're doing academic shit.
I kind of understood that, but it was like, oh, it's tenuous.
It also now makes an existential comic a little like, I now understand this one existential comic that mentions Wittgenstein. Now, like, oh, you know what? This makes a little more sense to me now about who this person is and why he's saying things in this comic. Where I was kind of like, this just seems weird. Were people actually like this? And now, thanks to James, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it now. I understand.
So,
good stuff.
So in this cloister, you have discovered one walking path, hilled like a sword but more coarsened. In my commentaries, I said that this is the third walking way. I was wrong. It is the second walking way. I was wrong because I simply got the fucking number wrong. So I have to go back and change that. I suggest that it is the second walking way because it is the defeat of hi Baka. It is the defeat of an enemy. But I can't ignore the possibility that Vivec was talking about the construction of wheels as a walking way. In which case, I don't know what the fuck, which one it was. I had no idea.
Well, also, caveat to that is that we know of 6 walking ways, but technically speaking, it's inferred that there are more.
Shit, that's true. All right,
so, like,
okay.
for all we know, it's like, there's like, yeah, you know 6 walking ways, but do you know the other 10? And it's like, God damn it, no. Like, we don't know.
So, hilled like a sword, but more coarsened. Edged is it that it has to be whispered to keep the tongue from bleeding, where its signs evacuate their former meanings like empires that tarry too long. So this is, believe it or not, a clue, but I'll be fucked if I could figure out what. I suggested that this might be due to something called semantic satiation, I think it's called.
What?
Semantic satiation, which is where you excuse me, where you say a word so often that it doesn't make any sense anymore.
That sounds prolix.
It's a phenomenon. It does, doesn't it? It's a phenomenon where it's a language or a neurological phenomenon where if you start to say a word a whole lot, you get good and stoned, and this happens easier. You start to say a word a lot, and you're like, "That's a funny word," and then like you start to like sound it out, and all of a sudden it doesn't really have the meaning that it used to. Like you don't correlate the word cow with an actual animal. Instead, you're just thinking about the noise of the word, of the way it feels when you say it. It loses its meaning.
That's me when I count using Mississippi. It's like 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 by the time I get to about 100 Mississippis, it's like this thing is as irrelevant as the actual state. Buzzing. But yeah, that's in my opinion how that works, though.
Arctic's correct. The cloister is the cave that the Whirling schools were being created in. So yes.
Okay. Any relation to Plato's cave?
Okay, I thought about that long and fucking hard, and
Phrasing.
everything in hey and everything in the everything that I came to was the idea of like if it was Plato's cave, then Vivec would have brought them out of the cave, because Vivec is trying to get them to understand the nature of the universe, and that would involve leaving the cave, or at least understanding, or not, or not dwelling in it, so to speak. So I think it was
Yes.
I think it was the idea is that they were cloistering themselves in a meditative way of separating themselves from the distraction and desires of the world, so that they can focus on spinning around and around and around until they throw up.
Okay, so more like the Buddhist caves. Okay,
yes.
gotcha.
So it's signs evacuate their former meanings like empires that tarry too long. Yeah, I'm not sure that I interpreted that properly. I'd be if I had to bet, I'd say I didn't. So the idea of the concept of the walking path is that it is a sword, hilled like a sword, but more coarsened. So edged is it that it has to be whispered to keep the tongue from bleeding. So this is a concept or a word or a truth that is dangerous and must be treated like a delicate meal. And I've just given you another clue.
Maybe.
All right. As to why it could be that I'm correct, that it's the second walking way. And so curved saws, yes. Curved hills. And so we'll clearly reference to posting edgy comments online. Whoa. Whisper it or the tongue is cut out by others. Could be Baka. That's a good idea. Yeah, it's a secret that your tongue will bleed because it is cut out. The sword is estrangement from statesmanship. Okay, so
yes. Well, actually, Clausewitz would entirely disagree with that.
Okay, so let's define statesmanship in this context.
Okay.
I suggested that it referred to the ego state. Because
that's a terrible pun.
Yes, but because we are already talking, I was already thinking about the moon Axel as an ego state, as in terms of the Jungian ego state. Also, ego self separation. I don't know if you guys are looking at the stream or not.
Sorry, my bad. I'm looking at stream now, yes.
Okay. Moon Axel.
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
Thoughts? Is the moon Axel name just a reference to Jung's diagram for ego self-separation?
It could be, because the death of the ego is required for achieving divinity. Okay.
I feel like a fucking conspiracy theorist when I point out shit like that. I'm like, but look, in this diagram, there are two circles and a line connecting them. What does a line mean? What does a line mean? What does a line? What does it mean?
You're like Charlie from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Exactly. And I can't.
I can't. Or depending QAnon, but yeah.
Yeah. So it's
given
sort
the
of
way that they tend to talk.
It feels a little bit like a sort of a conspiracy theory kind of like. It feels tenuous, but also I've made way fucking weaker connections in the New Whirling school. So like I've done worse, and I'll do it again.
Baka has a fantastic point. We are all conspiracy theorists when we get to deep lore, and if we start applying this way of thinking to real world stuff, that's where actual conspiracy theories happen. And it's a bad idea. But this is a safe, environment,
place.
So we can do it.
Yeah. It's a safe place. I mentioned more Crowley here. So for Crowley, the sword as intellect was meant to be the instrument used to rid oneself of the complexity that shrouded the inner will. However, it had seemingly paradoxical annotation to it, since the sword itself also represented the same faculties it is used to cut free. One who lives by the sword dies by the sword. The meaning, however, is that by sharpening the mental faculties, to purge emotion from perception would ultimately lead one to eliminate the need for the tool altogether. This sword being the means of removing one from oneself. It is why the word statesmanship was chosen. It is the removal of leadership of linear structure of command through bureaucracy.
Say that last sentence again.
Okay. The sword being the means of removing one from oneself. This is why the word statesmanship was chosen. It is the removal of the leadership of linear structure of command through bureaucracy. So it's the removal of the ego commanding the self. Does it feel weak to you? Because it felt weak when I wrote it. The moon as Nern's ego or Lorcan's discarded one. The moon as Lorcan's ego.
The moon as Nern's ego. That might also explain why Lorcan failed at Chim, if that's the actual way of looking at it. Because if you're talking about Chim as the balancing of the ego with the world and everything else, and self with the world, then if Lorcan is the moon, which is the ego of the world, then he can't really achieve the balance between the two. I don't know whether that makes sense.
The perverse incentive of government is not to govern, but merely sustain itself. The correct purpose of teaching is to not need teaching. Yeah. But I'm still not... I mean, these are all great things. This is all great concepts, but I still feel like the main root of the connection to the text is spurious and thin. The sword is estrangement from statesmanship. That's like, okay, but let's keep reading. Maybe it gets a little bit better.
The sword being estrangement from statesmanship, I fundamentally disagree with because...
Okay, good.
Because I agree with Clausewitz. Because in his text on war, I'm paraphrasing roughly, the line is, war is a continuation of politics by another means. Whereas the sword is an estrangement from statesmanship, tends to mean that you go to war when statesmanship has failed, whereas Clausewitz is, no, you achieve political aims via violence, which could actually also, now I think about it, link to the whole ideas of Amaranth as a statehood thing, or Chim potentially as a statehood thing. I can't remember quite how those two are distinct, but yes. Because there's talk about the whole cityhood and statehood.
Yes.
I can't remember whether that refers to
City face.
City face. We'll get to city face, but I can't. But I'm trying to think back to the Amaranth hunt, whether it was just the idea of kind of city and state and so on was just referring to Amaranth, or whether that comes up relative to Chim.
That's the promise of the Sige.
Yeah.
Image, egg. Man, God, city, state.
City, state. Yep.
Yeah. So to some of these points, it could also be kind of just a little bit more simple in that statesmanship is the pursuit of power and the mundrial. It's not the pursuit of true divine power. It's like, yes, gotta manage all the little lemmings so that the kingdom doesn't fall apart. As to the kingdom is ultimately meaningless when we're at the whim of cosmic forces. That's the real power, like there's something to be said for that angle.
Yeah, but you can also make the similar argument for violence, and so the sword being the estrangement from statesmanship would not be a weird thing to point out. It would be in the same category as statesmanship if being meditative and cosmic and all the rest of it was the actual true power.
Yeah, it's hard to really pin anything down, which is kind of just the nature of this whole sermon in general.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe it simply brings you close to violence or something.
Reach heaven through violence, yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. Still, it feels like we're kind of getting close to thinking about this as like the sword and the
word.
and the walking ways and the sword. Like one of the walking ways is related to the sword, and the help the treasure wood sword.
Yep.
If I recall correctly, has very strong connections to the second walking way. So, just don't remember what they are exactly.
On a future episode.
Yeah, exactly. We'll get to it when we get to it. But when the Empire's state was literally keeping the barrier between reality and oblivion intact. Oh. I think that might be related symbolically, but I don't know if it's related. I don't know what the word is, logically, or like I don't know if it's related in the context of this thing. But
I think your connection between the walking ways and the treasurewood sword is misremembering Sermon 23.
Could be,
because I give you an ancient road tempered by the second walking way. Your hand must be huge to wield any sword the size of an ancient road, and yet he who is of right stature may irritate the sun with only a stick. That's the only things I can see which tie a walking way with swords explicitly.
Yeah, but I do believe, I think I actually, in an AMA that MK did on in IRC, I asked him outright what the second walking way was, and he said when you just kick the shit out of all your opponents. like when you defeat every enemy that life throws at you.
Yeah.
It was in fact, in retrospect, it was the shittiest, dumbest question for me to ask, because it was the most obvious second of the walking ways in retrospect, but whatever.
We all grow and learn as people.
So
yeah.
Hopefully.
Well, I was just a little lorelet back then. Look on the estimable lines of my son, now crafted starwise, is every limb equidistant from the center. So this is now after they've sort of mapped out, remember, Moon Axel. Moon Axel now resembles a star in the respect that every limb is equidistant from the center. He is solved. Is he solved because I will it so?
Also kind of has like vague wheel kind of, all equidistant from the center. Kind of also sounds a bit like a spoke. So,
and also, except also without the thing that makes him Moon Axel. Because if we're going along the whole idea of an imperfect circle and so on, it's got without the curved lines and so on. So you're taking the outside of the rim off from that,
right.
And so you are removing the outer edge of the world, which gives you what? Which gives you a human form, if you think about the axles arranged in the same way.
Right.
A star with its penumbra broken off, something.
Pinned up like a frog. Yeah, kind of. Vitruvian man, that's the symbol man. I used.
Yeah. That's the image.
There cannot be a second stage. Just another one of those sentences that Vivec just throws into the middle of a paragraph. It seems so non sequitur, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's like, well, can you give us some more detail?
No. Think on the theory that my existence promulgates the 5 elements, and alike the egg-layered universe, I am cause for great density. Okay, yeah, everybody got that? Great, let's move on.
Yeah, sure, totally.
Here is a thought that can break the wagon's axle. Here is another that can soar. Okay, so you kind of have to take this whole paragraph in before any of it starts to make any sense. Think on the theory that my existence promulgates the 5 elements, and alike the egg-layered universe, I am cause for great density. What Vivec is saying here is that Vivec is the dense center around which the structure can be built. So,
which is the same for anyone. It's the same notion as the temporal myth is man.
How so?
Insofar as insofar as the structure of the universe is only given hold through intellect, it is only that the universe is only compiled and is brought together within a will, and therefore the universe only has meaning and is only entirely itself
if it can be observed by in consciousness.
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
Here is a thought that can break the wagon's axle. Here is another that can soar. So this is Vivec saying that these are the concepts that you learn in the Whirling School when you follow Vivec, is these concepts that can destroy the world or reality, or in this case, the moon axle, or that can cause you to fly, to achieve greatness, to etc.
Maybe even literally fly, because Morrowind did have levitation. So,
yeah, true. Back in the good old days, back before the Mages Guild got pissy about it. Yep.
Yeah, god damn, make Morrowind great again.
God damn it, where's my red hat? So that's
either that or your fur-lined yellow one.
Yeah, that's the arrow catcher.
Colovian, yep.
Like a sailed like a sort of more coarsened. Yeah, okay, Litora, that's. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, like the idea of it's like a hill, but because it's low poly, it's coarse. Yeah, I don't hate that. Sure. Yeah.
We're going back to the polygons, baby. Yeah.
It always comes back to polygons.
And so this is kind of the state that we like. I went hard for the ego death thing with Moon Axel. Because I was trying very hard to think about the children as if they were elements of Vivec's psyche, sort of. That does not work. As I discovered in later chapters, that does not work. But I'm still not. I don't hate these connections I made here, but I do feel like the stuff that we're covering today is. It's a very geometric sermon. Yeah, sure. Polymer.
Oh, if Morrowind had dad jokes, that'd be the best. No, don't groan. That is great.
Jesus. Well, on that note, let's end this cast.
Hey, bye, everybody.
Yeah.
Although hang on.
Yeah.
Well, before we do that, the thought that will break the wagon's axle is Moon Axle related to the wagon's axle in this sense?
See, again, that's kind of like when I was focusing so much on the ego self axis. I was thinking of it in terms of two circles connected by an axle, and that's kind of the conclusion that I came to, but I didn't really mention that in the New Whirling School commentary because I was still kind of like, that's kind of goofy. But I still don't hate that exactly. You like one of the things that like I keep having to remind myself here is that if it's possible that I could like sit Kirkbride down and like hypnotize his ass and make him like somehow remember the like what he was thinking while he was building the 36 lessons, and I would end up with like the actual answer to this sermon, and I'm reasonably certain it would be something like along the lines of I was just kind of sticking shit to the wall, dude. Like it would not surprise me at all if that was what was actually happening, and I don't think I would be disappointed, Baco, because the thing is the thing that I always come back to with the 36 lessons is that he wrote it in a week. That's fucking ridiculous. This is the fact that it's this good after a week's worth of work is amazing to me. It should have taken him like half a year if he was going to do it like air quotes right. Like if he was going to create a true work of like philosophy and metaphysics, it could have taken him a half a year just working on these, on these
even just the core concepts, let alone writing the lessons.
And so like I'm perfectly comfortable with the idea that that this sermon might just be kind of like some shit that he threw on a page and was just like, this looks good to me, and then that was all the work that went into it. That's fine. And part of the reasons why I like doing the commentaries on the New Whirling School is I like the idea of taking something that somebody just kind of like vomited out and then making it super ultra deep. And somehow exactly somehow it all fits together, even though by all rights it shouldn't. It's still possible to assemble. It's like taking a whole bunch of different puzzle pieces from a whole bunch of different puzzles and then assembling something that works. Is that in and of itself, is that not art?
Follow certain templates. You can actually swap out pieces for templates.
But it is kind of art, is building, like something deep and meaningful out of what could well be a pile of, I don't want to say a pile, but like a collection of very scattered ideas.
It doesn't even have to be that big. Like I have a story from an online forum where we're talking about how do people know in general when you're an adult, like what actually is we're trying to figure out what is the line where you can say, yes, I'm an adult now. And I just made a throwaway joke because I just want to be part of the conversation. I said, you're an adult when you realize you want to be a kid again. But because you can't like determine tone in a fucking forum post, lots of people were like, holy shit, dude, that's actually so deep. And, and I just didn't have the heart to tell them I was fucking around.
Just making shit up, dude. Yeah. And but
to them,
it's
they're
true.
like,
Sometimes
oh shit, there's actually some wisdom there. I'm like,
accidentally awesome.
Yes, but I was just being silly.
Yeah. And it's kind of the, like, I don't know. I think there's some legitimately excellent art in the 36 lessons, but there doesn't have to be every fucking paragraph, every goddamn sentence doesn't have to be a treasure trove of meaning. But I mean, that's what we do, is we take things, implications of meaning, that's what we do. So that's why it's fun.
Inferring significance in things devoid of detail.
Yep.
I think Haskell has a great quote about that, where like if Haskell was real, he'd be so pissed off with us.
Yes, he'd just be so pissed off in general, never mind with us.
Lothario in chat is also echoing another thought I've had, which is that maybe Kirkbride was so neat, like up to the gills in this kind of content, that when he started writing this stuff out, he may have accidentally, like, or subconsciously created something incredible and done it, like, not on purpose, but again, that's kind of like the Crowley approach to art, which is the moment you try to do it on purpose, you can't do it right. The moment the moment you desire an outcome is the moment where the outcome is guaranteed not to happen.
I feel that in Minecraft so hard.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, here's what I'm gonna do today. I'm gonna work on this, and then it's like, I can't bring myself to do it. And then it's like something else. I'm like, so this turned out really goddamn amazing, and that was not my intention.
Yeah, exactly. I did not expect this to be this good. Yeah. So 2 weeks. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yay!
Everybody wave.
More swords and dick jokes. Yeah. Bye, everybody.
Yes. Bye.